Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We have Rahul, Puri, MD at Mukta joining in. Rahul, my first question coming to you here is, uh, with COVID, how are you actually dealing with the situation?
Well, I mean, at the moment, to be honest, we've closed down all the theaters as per the government advisory. All head office staff are on work from home. We are trying to brainstorm and think about when we do get the theaters back open, what are the kinds of policies we're going to have to put in place to do two things. I think comply with what we believe the government restrictions will be in public places, and B, which I think is much more important, is to try and build a sense of confidence into the audience, so that they feel comfortable coming back to these places. I think that that sort of double-pronged way of thinking is really going to be what all theaters have to think about in this downtime. Then when we do get some clarity about when theaters can reopen, then it's a case of looking at each property on its merit, trying to understand what the concerns of the patrons are in that particular area, try and deal with those concerns, because we are essentially an audience-facing business, and try and put measures in place that can hopefully give people the confidence to come back.
Right. But in this lockdown period, do you think people will actually probably get used to the OTT platforms, and that's something which could impact as well in the long run? Or do you think both have their individual place?
Well, I think both do have their individual place. I mean, there's no question about that. But yes, you are right. I think that any form of viewing becomes habitual. And I think that we have all become habituated to watching things on television and OTT, both which have seen, huge spikes in their viewership over the last month or so. And I think that for a number of people, the kinds of convenience that OTT has given them is going to be hard to shake. And therefore, as I mentioned, what cinemas are going to need to do is really put out and re-educate the public in terms of the safety and the experience of going to a theater. Because I think that once all those sort of things are in place, where people are comfortable with the safety, people are comfortable with the kind of content they're going to get, people will come back. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be done overnight.
Right. Now, do you think an option of theaters acting like OTT platforms could be an option, at least in the period of lockdown?
As in getting people to sort of demand some kind of content on the theater. Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that is going to be patently obvious when theaters open up is that there is going to be a lag between when theaters open up and sort of big marquee films start to come back to the theaters. It's a chicken and egg situation, really, where all the theaters need these big marquee films to try and attract audiences, but the big marquee films want audiences before they actually release. So that chicken and egg situation is going to exist, and it means that there will be a lag time, and in that lag time, theaters are going to have to get very creative and experimental with the kind of programming that they're going to have to put in. So I do expect to see, marathons. I do expect to see festivals. I do expect to see, vote for programming on social media. I do expect to see all of those things, because everybody is going to try to give themselves the best possible opportunity to pull some kind of occupancy.
Right. And right now, with the lockdown that started mid-March, what's the kind of revenue loss you are looking at?
Well, I mean, we've been closed a month, and you can expect that, if we're sort of set to hit about an 85 CR top line. Mukta to Cinemas was expected to do that. March and April typically is a pretty good period for films. I would expect that we would have lost at least, safely a twelfth of that top line, if not slightly more, because obviously going into March and going in April is generally a good period for film. So I mean, I would expect us to have lost a substantial amount over that period, and it's a loss that you can't regain. You can't make that up.
Right. And Rahul, how are you managing fixed costs then? Because employee cost is something that you have to look at. Rentals is something that you have to look at. And when there is no cash flow, there's no revenue pouring in. For how long will you continue like this? Or for how long any cinema chain will continue like this?
So, I mean, obviously, we have force majeure elements in our contracts. We have pulled all of those force majeure in terms of fixed costs on rentals. We're in a pretty good position in terms of the fact that a number of our theaters are actually revenue share. So from that point of view, no revenue coming in means no rental costs going out. Electricity, all of those sort of fixed costs. We have written to the electricity board. We're expecting that we'll get some benefit from them in terms of moving those costs 3 months down the line, giving us some credit period. We've already got some benefit on statutory payments in terms of GST. All of those things, we've got some credit. But the bottom line is that not just our business, but I think a lot of businesses and a lot of industries are going to expect more from the government in the time to come to help us combat some of these issues. The reality is that obviously most of the industry bodies have already been and made some kind of representation to the government about the fallout of this pandemic. I think that if the government looks at sort of some kind of large scale policy which fits a number of businesses, so if you take businesses that have high fixed costs, high overheads to try and deal with, that's something that perhaps can cut across different businesses. In America, for instance, the US have got a bailout plan that focuses on businesses with large fixed costs. There's no reason that cinemas can't take advantage of something like that. The reality is that if the industry needs to continue in the vein that it was before, it is going to have to lean on the government for some help over the next 6 months.
Right. But Rahul, do you think taking our position, our economic position into consideration, do you think we will actually be capable, probably in the lines of a US or in lines of Europe, the kind of bailout packages they are giving out? Do you think our country can afford it? Because
I have no idea what priorities the government is going to have. I think it is important, I think, for the economy as a whole post COVID-19 that the government does try to kickstart some kind of economic activity. And that kickstarting of economic activity can't just be at the very top levels of industry. It's got to be something that filters down to the smaller businesses as well, because those are the businesses that at the end of the day are in the most trouble, are in the most danger of closing down or going into bankruptcy. So the government is going to have to think of weighing its priorities over the next 6 months and looking at something that can appeal to a larger swathe of the economic industry. And I think that our government has been very, very good in its reaction to the pandemic. I think India has closed down and we must applaud them for the proactivity that they have shown in terms of dealing with the health crisis part of this pandemic. I think a time will come, and I'm not saying that that time is now, but I think a time will come where the priority needs to shift from managing the health crisis to managing the economic crisis that's going to follow.
Right. And overall, Rahul, if you have to talk about consumer confidence as well, audiences, yes, will be reluctant to return. There is a fear that people may not return to cinemas immediately. Now, how long do you think it will take for cinema halls to get back to some sort of normalcy post the lockdown?
October, November. I wouldn't expect it before then. If you looked at the big Hollywood studios, they moved all their big releases 6 months ahead, a minimum of 6 months ahead. So now films that were releasing in April are now releasing in November. So I would not expect that we would have some consistent form of normalcy until October, November. We may be bolstered by the fact that we have some big holidays coming up, in August, obviously, we've got Independence Day and things like that. But I don't see a consistent level of occupancy coming back to theaters, at least until October.
Right. So are we trying to say, Rahul, that, okay, number one, even if somewhere we start seeing recovery from October, November onwards, but with that, there is liquidity crisis that even big budget movie projects, production houses that would be struggling on. Now, it's going to be a double whammy here as well, because you have lower footfalls. You will have, production houses that will be actually pushing and postponing their releases as well. So that overall is going to have an impact on the box office collections, not only in FY21, but probably it could even impact, say, the first quarter of FY22 then.
Yeah, it will. What you're going to see is films that generally have less holding power. So smaller producers, regional producers that don't have the ability to hold on to their films for that long. Those are the films that you're going to see releasing first. They're going to be looking at the fact that perhaps they can get more screens, perhaps they can get better shows if they release first. But the question is there going to be an appetite within the audience to go out and watch those films? You're right, the bigger films are going to want the occupancy to settle down. They're going to want that people are back in malls or back in theaters, back moving around, with relative freedom. That's the time that they're going to want to put these films out into public consumption, and that's going to take time. And this is what I'm saying about the fact that we are going to need some government support, because the reality is that even when the theaters get back online, you are not going to be able to look at anywhere near the kind of occupancy levels that we were getting before. And if small single screen businesses were running cut to cut, we've seen so many single screens shut down over the last 2 or 3 years. If they were running cut to cut at those occupancy levels, I mean, they're still going to be operating at a loss. Even when the lockdown is over and they're allowed to open up. So we are going to need something to lean on, and I think that the government is aware of this. The question is how quickly and how much it can kind of react for industry to take advantage of.
Right. Rahul, do you think there could be a phase where production houses could start releasing movies on the OTT platforms, probably for a extra amount than what the subscribers are paying for the subscription amount, and that could be something that could start happening as a new normal as well?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think the bigger films are still going to want to hold on to theatrical release, but certainly the opportunity for smaller films is definitely look at the OTT. The thing that we have to understand also is that OTTs in India rely on local content.
Right.
Maybe once in a while a piece of international content comes that gets a lot of eyeballs. But other than that, it kind of relies on the Indian content. Now, production has been closed for the last 5 weeks. So you are going to understand that eventually they're going to start running out of new content to produce. Now, so where are they going to find new content from that's sort of ready to be able to put out? The answer is by looking at films that were close to release or ready to release, and perhaps offering some kind of a premium for that. I mean, we saw Angrezi Medium go straight to Disney Plus, sort of cutting its losses and going there. And I think it is something that smaller producers will certainly look at, if the price is right.
Right. In fact, I think China, if I'm not mistaken, tried reopening a couple of theaters as well, once their lockdown was done. And the issue that they faced was lower occupancy. They tried giving out discounts in terms of ticketing prices. Prices were reduced. However, they were not really able to maintain the fixed costs as well on the back of lower occupancies. Now, for India, or for a theater that you're operating, what's the kind of minimum occupancy that you require to at least break even?
It depends from theater to theater, so it's not, but I think, anywhere between sort of 15 and 20% is the minimum that you want. Obviously you want to be more than that. But, if you're looking at operating, I'd say a minimum of 15 to 20%. Anything lower than that, quite frankly, doesn't make any sense, because you have to understand that you'll get the benefit of pushing this fixed costs as long as you're not operating. The minute you start operating, you have to then start paying the fixed costs that you have. So all of the theaters are going to have to take a very educated call, even when they are allowed to open up theaters, as to really when they are going to come back and open up their theaters, because there's no point opening up your theaters if you're going to have occupancy of 2 or 5%.
Absolutely.
Because then you're operating with all your fixed costs, and you're having to pay all your fixed costs, and you're actually incurring massive losses in that period. Now, it's probably better for you to perhaps lean on the fact that your theater is closed, take some advantage of the fact that it's closed, push the fixed costs for a little while longer, and then perhaps wait for occupancy or at least consumer mood to improve before opening up. So all of those things are going to be considerations. So I don't see, when lockdown gets lifted and when theaters are allowed to open, I certainly don't see all the theaters reopening. I don't think that's a realistic idea at all.
Right. So Rahul, what's the kind of revival plan that you have post-lockdown? Because again, on the expansion front as well, not only any particular industry, majority of the industries have gone ahead and halted expansion plans. What's your sense on it? Because I think back then in December 2019 itself, you had announced you will be launching 21 new screens in the next 18 months. So is that plan on?
Well, I think the plan is certainly going to be delayed, isn't it? We do have a couple of theaters that, frankly, we were supposed to launch in May or June. They're almost ready for completion. The question is now, how quickly we can get those finished and get those launched. But I do think that, given the fact that cash flow is a problem, liquidity is an issue, we are going to have to be a little bit careful with where we put our investments in the next 6 months to 9 months. That is going to push back investments in new screens for sure. It is going to delay the launches of those new screens. But we're still very bullish about the industry. We're still very bullish about the market. I think that there's no doubt that it will take time for the exhibition business to return to normalcy, but there's no doubt that it will return to normalcy. I think that the fundamentals for this business are still pretty strong. we remain hugely underscreened. We remain a country of a massive demand for exhibition. So I do want to sort of reiterate our commitment to the business. But yes, post an economic shock like this, you will see some rescaling of how we're going to roll those screens out. But I will say that those screens will get rolled out, just perhaps not in the way that we thought they would be.
Right. Now, let me play a devil's advocate here. Uh, if you have to get consumer confidence back as well, a couple of things that you will have to do with regards to providing hygiene kits, say probably at the theaters, looking at social distancing. Now, taking the population into consideration, any which ways, the number of cinemas to the number of, to the population, the ratio is still at the lower edge in India. We still have a lot more space to get more cinema halls. But if you have to look at the social distancing perspective as well, and if the consumer confidence revives, then do you think expansion at a good speed will be a good option? Because again, you will have to leave seats in between to accommodate these kind of people. I mean, this quantum of people, you will need more theaters, and probably that's when you will see look at a price hike as well.
I mean, I think the again, it's different for different businesses, isn't it? It's different scales of companies. I think if you are the larger multiplex chains, then that's a way of looking at it. But when you're a multiplex chain like ours, we need to focus on each screen that we open up, ensure that that screen delivers the kind of margins that we're looking for. And keep the margins strong on the screens that we've currently got running, the 72 screens that we have in operation. I think that given the norms that are going to be in place, we will have to look at how we manage to maximize other revenues around our product offering, in terms of F&B, in terms of combos, in terms of advertising, in terms of things like that. Because the social distancing norms are going to be in place. And a lot of people talk about staggered seating or leaving a seat, etc., all of those kinds of things. But the biggest challenge that lots of people are going to face, particularly bigger multiplexes in malls, single screen multiplexes, is what to do with the large foyers that they have, right? What to do with the fact that, if you've got a 500 seat auditorium, 400 or 450 people are going to be accumulated somewhere for them to be able to come in to the theater. That might mean that it takes longer time for people to come into the theater, get seated, all of those kinds of things, exit the theater after the film. That might eat into the number of shows that you're able to run. All of those dynamics you are going to have to think of, because all of those dynamics are going to play a part in the revenue that you're able to garner, and therefore what you're able to reinvest in new screens.
Right. Rahul, another question that's coming in right now is that the purchases at cafeterias are expected to go down after opening for some time. So what's your take on it, and how should one approach to increase the SPH at units?
I think that, purchasing in cafeterias, I'm not 100% sure it's going to go down. I think that that's a question of us being able to find a way to monetize what we've got in a better manner. Certainly, we will all have to look at our F&B offerings to be able to make sure that we are, without putting any pressure on pricing and stuff like that, we are able to keep those sales at a relatively good level. I think that part of the communication that needs to go out is this experience that I'm fairly sure lots of people are missing, quite frankly, going to theaters, and try and market that experience. And part of that experience is F&B. So I'd be looking at combos, I'd be looking at deals, I'd be looking at rewards, I'd be looking at loyalty, some kind of loyalty schemes. I'd be looking at all of those kinds of things to try and keep SPH at a higher rate.
Right. Rahul, lastly, my question is, do you think you can kickstart the F&B side of business right now, though people can't come to the theaters, but probably at least you could provide them the F&B experience at home through deliveries, if that gets allowed.
If that gets allowed, why not? It is possible to do it. Tie up with a food service provider like a Swiggy or a Zomato or something like that, and while people are watching their favorite show on one of the OTT platforms, you send them popcorn and a Pepsi. I think in reality, the kind of costs involved in running those might not necessarily make up for the kind of revenue that you might garner. But sure, if there's a demand, I'm fairly sure that cinemas can think about it.
Right. All right, Rahul. Pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for joining in as
Thank you.
well. We
Thank
will
you very
connect
much.
back with you as well once things open up to understand as to how the things have progressed from here on. But thank you very much.
Sure.
And stay
Thank
home.
you. Thank you. Yes, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.